This presentation is going to focus on one simple concept, one simple algorithm that, when harnessed, can absolutely tremendously change your life and the lives of your children and your family. Growing meaningful wealth using real estate is down to one algorithm. And in my view, this is it. This is what I have picked up over my career. It's debt multiplied by time multiplied by scale equals wealth. So we're all familiar with debt by time by scale equals wealth. Or maybe we're not, because it's just something that I've been working on for a while in my own mind. But these concepts are directly proportional to one another. No real wealth is created in the absence of the other. So let's think about this. If you have a toxic relationship with debt, you just paid off your student debt as an example, you might say, well, I never want to be in debt again. Well, that's going to be very hard for you to create wealth. You'll probably end up going to be an employee most of your life, and it is almost impossible with the hurdles involved with W-2 income, paying tax, saving, maybe doing well in some kind of investments, but again, paying tax on those investments. So if you have a toxic relationship with debt, it's going to be very hard for you to create wealth. If you are quite old, and this is not, if you're 100 years old, you don't have time. So I think it is fair to say that most of us want to consider retiring somewhere between, their mid-50s and mid-60s. Let's say that that's an average. So, if you want to use real estate, you have to kind of backtrack about 20 years from there. So if you want to retire at 50, you need to have your investments, all your investments in play by the time you're 30. And then you kind of work it out from there. If you want to retire at 55, you need to be working at all of your investments at 35, and so on and so forth. I think for most people, you really, really need to be investing when you're using this algorithm by the time you're 45. So, and if, it's never too late to work on investing in real estate long term, but just the sooner the better. And we're going to touch on that concept. And then we have the concept of scale. So if you have $200,000 of debt and you're 30 years of age and that's all you do, and you don't have scale, it's not going to make a meaningful difference in your life. So we're going to talk about what debt is, what time is, and what scale is, so that we understand what wealth means to you. So wealth means a different thing to everybody out there. So they're directly proportional to one another. And we're going to move on and we're going to talk about what does debt mean. Okay? So, in my view, debt. Unless you have a scalable business, you own a restaurant, you can continue to open more restaurants, or you own a store, or you own a tech firm, or a medical firm, unless you have something that can be scaled, or unless you are a uniquely lucky investor, you manage to put $100,000 on Google at early stage or Amazon at early stage, sure, wealth can be created that way. But you kind of uniquely, I wouldn't have that as being my primary focus of wealth creation. Or let's say you're a prominent CEO. So there are exceptions to the earning your way to wealth concept. There are people who do get there. But again, they're reasonably rare. The vast majority of investors that I talk to every day, they're well paid, they're well-paid professionals, but they fit into none of these categories. So in order to understand what debt is, understand this: you must have debt to create wealth, because debt converts to wealth over time. So if you have $200,000 of debt and that converts to wealth over time, and just converting to wealth means that if you have a $200,000 mortgage and the tenants pay it off, each month it is converting. The debt is turning into equity, and equity equals wealth. So over time, debt converts to equity. So if you have $200,000 of debt, over time, that debt will convert into equity for you. If you have $400,000 of debt, that will convert, and conversely so on from there. So the more debt that you have, the more debt that you're comfortable with, quite frankly, the more wealth you're probably going to create for yourself. And this is why really wealthy people use real estate to create wealth and to create ever increasing, the 1%, if you will. The ever increasing cascade of wealth is given to or awarded to those that take a certain amount of debt risk. As I mentioned earlier, it is insanely hard to create meaningful wealth without debt. I meet well-paid professionals who come to this realization every day. And, I put myself somewhat into that category. I'm in the fix and flip business. I flip somewhere around 100 homes a year. I'm very busy doing that. It is somewhat lucrative as a career, as an earner. But then at the end of the year, I pay enormous amounts of tax. And by the time I'm finished with the rest of my life overheads, even though I'm a reasonably well-paid professional, it is insanely hard to create meaningful wealth, even if you're like an exceptionally well-paid professional. So I want you to think about that. It's really, really difficult to create meaningful wealth through working a W-2 income, even if that's a big W-2 income. In my view, as I become older, I realize one thing, and I realize this when I see my monthly statements come in. As your tenants make principal payments, that's what makes you wealthy over time, because it happens in your sleep. It happens every month. They go out to work, they come home, they pay rent, you take that rent and you pay principal payments. So one of the big mistakes I see in real estate is what I call cash flow junkies. In the podcast world, or in the real estate world in general, there's a huge amount of emphasis on cash flow markets, or I'm after cash flow, I want this cash flow. Oh, the numbers will tell me if this is a good investment or not. I disagree almost entirely with that concept. Okay, to me, it's about the size of my loan and the size of my monthly principal payments. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't completely ignore the concept of cash flow. But remember, you pay tax on cash flow. You get wealthy through principal payments. It's a really interesting concept, and later on in this presentation, we're going to talk about it. But it's the principal payments that are making you wealthy over time. Not just principal, because this is just the debt part. I also emphasize to people all day long, use your 10 conventional loans wisely. These are your golden eggs. Do not waste them on small loans and cheap houses. If you have 10 conventional loans and you use them on $100,000 homes, you now have $1 million worth of real estate. Assuming a 20% down payment on that, you have $800,000 of loans and you have $1 million of real estate. Conversely, if I have 10 $300,000 homes, I have $3 million worth of real estate, and I have, in my case, $600,000 down, and I've $2.4 million worth of mortgages. So it makes sense that if we both have 10 roofs, we both have 10 tenants, we both have 10 property managers, we both have 10 kitchens, we both have the same bathrooms, and yet I have a higher quality, higher priced asset than my example, I will get wealthier every month much faster than my example will. So it's important to use your golden eggs carefully. I meet a huge amount of people who come to me and they're in their kind of mid to late 40s. They've done 5, 6, 7 or 8 real estate deals in the past, and they're coming to me and they're talking about the Florida market, and I ask them what they've done before, and they have just a litany of cheap houses behind them. And I thankfully for me, I realized this concept reasonably early in my career. Now, I'm not saying to throw out the cash flow concept entirely. I know that inexpensive homes with higher cash flow make people feel better because the numbers look better on paper. But actually, it's been my experience, and this is what this webinar is about me looking back and me looking in hindsight at my career and my experience. Is the investments that I purchased that were of a higher value have appreciated more. They've created more wealth for me than the cheaper ones. And I'm not saying the cheaper ones are to be ignored. I'm just saying if you can, if you're buying a cheap house, buy that one with cash. And then with your loans, use your 10 conventional loans wisely. Because for a lot of people, that's the extent of what they can do. And if you have a working age spouse or partner, they can equally get 10 also. So two professional couples or two professional people as a couple can certainly join forces and get up to 20 conventional loans. And I do stress that don't put both of your names on every loan. You can put both of your names on every deed, but try not to put your names on every loan. So debt, just understand what it is. It is a tool for creating wealth. It converts to wealth over time. Principal payments make you wealthy, and use your loans very carefully. And that's the debt segment.